Mabel Horton is from Nisichawayasihk Cree Nation in Nelson House, Manitoba. She is fluent in Rocky Cree. There are efforts to reclaim the language, and Mabel has seen a drive in younger generations to connect with their roots.
Mabel Horton Tigawin, Mejito Kunisquin Stigason, Nisichawayasihk Cree Pisinto Team, Agan Pawagan Gokumanaki Chits. So that was our official introductions to ourselves when we were at meetings or in the presence of elders, and for story purposes, obviously. And I usually don't share my traditional name, but in this case, I think it's important that we do so people know what it's all about. And so I had my English name first, and then my traditional name that was given to me by my auntie, and then where I'm from. So that was Nisichawayasihk Cree Nation, Nelson House, Manitoba. And then our clan, which is Pisu, lynx. And then I have a dream spirit, the spider. So that's how I translated that. I guess to begin with, this is for language purposes. I'm fluent in my language as much as possible. Some are better speakers than I am, but I'm 74, so I learned my language when I was growing up, obviously, in Nisichawayasihk Cree Nation, and through my parents, my grandparents, aunties, and cousins, and we all always spoke our language, which is Rocky Cree, and some call it Woodlands Cree, but we're Rocky Cree from that area of the Manitoba. And so till we went to school, which was 6 years old, and then we started learning English at the time. But I want to reiterate some stuff that I've been telling people about this wonderful book I read called Braiding Sweetgrass. And in there's a chapter to distinguish between the English language and our Indigenous languages. And I thought it was so revealing because the way, because when you speak your own language, you don't even analyze it, you just speak it. And then the way this lady, she's a Harvard University professor, Indigenous woman, and she said that right from the get-go, the English language is all about nouns, whereas our language is very a lot of verbs and very descriptive. So from the get-go, like when you're born, your parents speak to you and your mom. But and then of course we had to learn the English language, so that was quite different for us when we were just 6 years old. So people would, and then in our language also there's no gender, so there's no male, female. It's either inanimate or animate. And that's the interesting aspect of it. Because a rock could be animate, although English people say it's a rock. It's got no life to it. But we in our ceremonies, we use grandfather rocks when we have our sweats. So there's life in that spirit. And so that's one difference for the language. Or the other example the lady gave in that book that I'm referring to was to say, oh, this is a bay, like the lake. This is a bay, but in our language it means more than just a bay. It's an action. There's life there. There's food there. There's fish there, plants, and all the rest of it. So I think it's very descriptive, and I think also with the Indigenous languages, the Algonquin language, which is like an umbrella group for Anishinaabe, Anishinaabe, and Cree. So that's a combination, and we can understand each other a little bit, certain words, and you have to listen very carefully. But I think that's important. Like we can understand people from BC or elsewhere, like Dakota. I don't understand them. But for the Cree Nation across Canada, it actually starts from Alberta, even further in Alberta, and then it goes throughout Canada, like the Hudson Bay, the James Bay, and all the way to Quebec. So the Montagnais Cree, we can understand each other as well. So it's the biggest nation, I think, for speaking. And then the next one is Anishinaabe, and then Inuktitut, that are preserved. But I can't remember how many languages there are altogether in our nations, but it's quite a few. There's, even in just BC alone, there's 230 communities, and they all have different languages, because they're so small. Pardon me. But another example is in Manitoba for Woodlands Cree, Rocky Cree, Swampy Cree, Prairie Cree, and there's one more. Anyway, the dialect's different. People tell me it's a dialect, and like I said, my English wasn't my first language, but I call it an accent. But they said, no, it's a dialect, Mabel. So for instance, if I say Nina, that's me, and but that's Norway House and Cross Lake dialect, na. In my community in Nisichawayasihk Cree Nation and Pangitawakan is Nida, but it's still the same word. And in Prairie Cree, it's Nia. So you have to really, and then in Shamattawa area, it's Nila. So it's all, but it still means me. So I had to take, I shouldn't say I had to, I was quite interested in taking my language in a university setting to learn the syllabics and everything else. And we had lots of non-Indigenous people speaking, like reading the verses or sentences in Cree, and beautiful. They just read it lovely. And as Cree speakers, we had to go syllable by syllable, because when we speak, we have to say it fast. And then, like, you don't say Nisichawayasihk, you go Nisichawayasihk. So, people had a hard time with that. And then one example was this non-Indigenous lady was reading, and just a slight touch of an accent, you can tweak words. You've probably heard that in other languages as well. And then she was reading away about a bush, a forest, a bush. And she said instead it was a skunk. So it's just that little twist of that word. So of course we all laughed, and she was wondering why we're laughing. But no, it's I love my language. I wish I could speak more. And we've had during the pandemic, we've had gatherings at my place, or before the pandemic actually. Then we wanted to go to Zoom to be able to speak to each other with Cree-speaking people in Winnipeg or elsewhere for Zoom, but we haven't got around to that one yet. But I used to have the gatherings at my place to speak only Cree for an hour, and it's hard because we're always mixing Cree and English all the time. And just to be able to fully speak Cree for an hour, I still find it difficult. But we did plays, so we had a story and the little video going, so that was fun. My grandchildren, they're in BC, one's 10, one's 8 boys, but they don't know the language. In fact, they were studying, one of the youngest one, the oldest one, the 10-year-old, was in daycare, so he started to learn Mandarin. So we said, well, that's really good. But I didn't understand him, didn't understand me. So that's unfortunate. Like we were mentioning before the interview, that we're losing our languages so quickly. And so it's so important to learn it, because the whole Indigenous worldview is through language, and you can explain too well to a non-Indigenous person. Like I was saying about the rocks in the bay, and because it's a whole context of the universe, and spirituality comes into a lot of it. And so the words are so descriptive. And then I mentioned that there was no gender in our language, so it makes it so easy for us right now with he, she, they type of thing with people now. So I thought, oh my goodness, I'm so glad I speak Cree. And what's the other thing I was going to say? With your relatives, and talking on my maternal side, the paternal side, you say auntie on your dad's side and auntie on the other side. It's different meaning. But when you talk to other people, they know, oh, that's your dad's aunt, dad's sister. So it makes a difference. As far as the residential school goes, I mentioned like we spoke Cree till I was 6 years old at home and started to learn English, but we weren't too bad where we were. I was in a Catholic day school, and of course we played outside. There was only one teacher, so we could just speak Cree whenever we wanted to, which I'm sure we did all the time. And then in residential school, I didn't feel any, nobody slapped me or hit me because I spoke my language, but you hear horror stories with other survivors, and I don't like the word survivor. for residential school, but that's the latest word they're using, and for speaking your language. And then some were too ashamed to speak their language as well, but we're always encouraged to speak our language when we got home. So that was a plus for my parents and my grandparents. And the other thing I did with all the languages of, I forget, there was funding for, I think there still is, for speaking your language at home. And so the government, the federal government, have given lots of money to schools and individuals. And I got a grant, and I'm still working on it because of the COVID. I couldn't finish it. So next month I have to finish it with year end. But I want to do legends, Atsudahokiwina, in my language, but with High Cree. So the really older people, not even older, ones my age, and Cree is so elegant. And so there's, somebody said, is that like Low German and High German? I said, I don't know. But that's the High Cree speakers. It could be just one word that they combined with a long sentence, a long descriptive sentence. I can't give an example offhand, but so we have a few left that speak High Cree. And one of them is a retired minister, my cousin, and his Cree is really, really, really good. And he lives in the city as well. And so we were filming the speakers. We had about 8 people, and then we'll produce it. Well, it's produced. You just have to wrap it up and give them the government wanted it in CD-ROM, but we said, hang on, it's 2 years later. We have to use flash drives and USB sticks. So, and I said, well, why do you want it? Because you don't even understand the language, but they want to preserve the languages, so, which is a good idea. So I think that's important. There's Children of the Earth School, I believe is still here, and they were teaching their children the languages. But of course there's 5 in Manitoba, so you either have to pick Cree or the predominant one, or Anishinaabe. And I know in Cross Lake, where we worked before, my husband and I, Nisichawayasihk Cree Nation, they were one of the first ones to start teaching them in school as well as at home. Like, of course they speak at home, but they started at home. And to this day, I can pick a speaker from Cross Lake. If you're in the mall, just fluent. It's amazing. It's just really nice. So kudos for them. But I think the younger generation is starting to be more aware of finding their roots, finding their grandparents' ancestry, and learning the language. And we keep encouraging them. Said, well, like I was saying, we were giggling at this girl that made that mistake of the skunk and the bush. But just to encourage them and not laugh at them, and just, it's just the way we are. And reading, plays, singing, and then cultural camps, like full immersion would help with the children. But just starting from the beginning. I'm retired now from nursing, but 10 years, but I'm still in all these committees. And one of them is to do with midwifery and doulas. We call them birth helpers. And so the women, the young ladies that are pregnant, and they talk to their baby in the language, like throughout. And then as soon as baby comes out, everything's in Cree and the traditional ways they do things. So it's happening. It's not dead. And I think it's encouraging. So I really enjoy that part of the teaching the women. For my generation, so we've been in our 60s and 70s, probably now people in their 20s and 30s didn't, the ones that grew up, they didn't want our kids to speak the language, so everything was spoken in Cree. Prime example, my sister, who's younger than me, and my brother-in-law, who's Cree as well, they didn't speak to their kids in the language. So consequently, they understand it, but they don't speak it. So you just have to encourage that way of speaking. Because my brother-in-law is from Puginawagan with a thick TH accent, and then we have a softer TH accent. So I guess maybe that aspect. But for myself, personally, after I graduated from nursing, I went to Southern Community, but I always knew I wanted to go back to the north to speak the language. So my first stop was Winkler, Manitoba, very German. And then my next stop was Norway House Indian hospital. So of course your patients are Cree speaking, and then after that it was Cross Lake, and then again the accent or the dialect was different to mine, and they knew where I was from. So, oh, that's a lady from Nelson House. Nisichawayasihk Cree is what they called me, and so you can tell where people came from just from the accent. But I think the more we teach them and the more exposure they have, like there's apps now for everything, and one of them is a Cree one. I have my Cree dictionary on my phone there, but it's in the Prairie Cree. But there's a colleague of mine, former colleague of mine, he's doing lots of language apps in Dakota. He's not fluent in his Anishinaabe, but he interviews older people, and then they use the app, and he taught his kids how to speak the language, and they didn't speak initially. So yeah, it's there, it's not dying, and like I mentioned, Cree and Anishinaabe and Inuktitut seems to be the strongest language in Canada right now. So yeah.